I'm an alcoholic. It's a privilege and an honor to be asked to do anything for Alcoholics Anonymous. It saved my life, and I didn't think I wanted to be saved, or that I needed to be saved, or that I could be saved, really. And thank you, Carlisle, for asking me. My sobriety date is May 18th of 2011. I have a sponsor. I have the privilege of sponsoring other women in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I have a home group, which is here. And in a general way, I'm going to tell you what my life was like, what happened to me, and what my life is like today as a direct result of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I say I'm an alcoholic, it means to me two things, right? I can't drink safely, right? I have that peculiar mental twist, and I have the physical allergy, right? The phenomenon of craving. And our book talks about that too. And in one of the first chapters, it talks about how you identify in and really, do I think I'm an alcoholic? And if I think I am, then this is what's going to work for me. It's the only thing that's going to work for me. And there's an or statement in there, and for me, it's both, right? I find that when I try to stop, I can't stay stopped entirely. And when I drink, I can't say with 100% certainty what's going to happen, how many I'm going to have, if I'm going to go home tonight, if I'm going to make it home this week, because I was a binge drinker from the start, and I was also a blackout drinker, so there's a lot I don't remember. And I was like that from the first time I drank. Some people, it takes them a while to build up to that, and for me, I drank like a fish. You know, I took to it naturally, and I didn't know how to moderate because I didn't want to moderate. And not everybody is like that. All I'm going to share is my experience and what that's been like, and my journey through my drinking, and then into Alcoholics Anonymous, into my journey in recovery. Because it's been a while, and I'm always grateful to stay sober, because I know there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that just because I go to bed sober tonight doesn't mean I'm going to stay sober tomorrow. There's some things I have to do here in order to stay here. It's not like a free ride, you know. I have to give back, or I'm going to get restless, irritable, and discontent, and that's untreated alcoholism. And for me, I had that, and a drink didn't really fix it. It helped mask it. And then when I got sober, I was still left with me and alcoholism. And so I have to do what we do here. I had to go through the book with my sponsor. I had to do the steps, and then I have to give back. And if I don't, I suffer as a result. And if I'm suffering, I tend to lash out at everybody in my life. And I wish it wasn't like that, but for me, that's what happens. And then I'm miserable, and I'm unhappy, and then I have to get right back into action. So my drinking didn't start until I was 17. So for me, I was a late bloomer. I didn't really get into it in high school. My family life growing up was not ideal. It was not normal. It was not perfect. I had everything I needed for the most part. I didn't have everything I wanted by far. My family was different, and a lot of people talk about feeling different, and I felt different, and the circumstances in my life made it so other people looked at me differently. You know, I had friends that once my parents divorced, and they had a really ugly custody battle where they would where they called the cops on each other, and you know, that kind of stuff spreads, and then all the moms were talking about it, and then the kids had overheard, and all of a sudden it wasn't cool to talk to Katy anymore. You know, so I had a bunch of friends before that, and then all of a sudden nobody wanted to talk to me, no one wanted to be around me, no one wanted to speak to me, and I didn't understand why. You know, and I just thought, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just thinking about it wrong, but I was a painfully shy child, and it was hard for me to look you in the face. It was hard for me to talk to you. It was hard for me to engage with you because I didn't know how, and I thought if I just watched you, then I could figure out how to talk to you. You know, and I was like a thief as a child. If I wanted something, I took it, and I didn't even realize it until I was home, and I emptied out my pockets, and I realized I had like reached in other people's desks without realizing it. And I didn't remember that until I got sober, and was like, oh, that's really uncomfortable, you know. And I was talking with Shannon about it the other day. You know, I remember I was 5, and my dad had taken me to a gas station. I think it was a Sunday morning, because that was really the only time he was around when my parents were still together. And I had pocketed a lollipop because I wanted it, and he had told me no. and he had bought donuts, and I wasn't really paying attention to the donuts. I just remember I had a lollipop in my pocket, and I was so eager to eat it that I unwrapped it in the car, and my daddy snatched it out of my mouth, and we turned around and we went right back, and I had to, tell the guy at the counter what I had done, and I couldn't look him in the face, and I remember feeling like I was about the size of an ant, and it wasn't that I felt bad that I did it, it was I felt bad that I got caught, and that was the type of behavior that continued throughout my drinking, it wasn't that I was sorry for what I had done, I was sorry that I got caught, because then it changed how you thought about me, and then when I got home, I wasn't allowed to have a donut because people that steal aren't rewarded, and I told Shannon that I never stole again after that, consciously stole, because I remember stealing stuff and putting it in my pockets, it wasn't something that I wanted to do again, because that level, my dad was my world, he was my idol, he was my hero, he was who I looked up to, he was what I wanted to grow up and to go to work like my dad and show up for his family like my dad, I wanted to just be big and strong, I didn't have a problem with anything in the world, right? And I obviously didn't do that. I started drinking instead. And then I wound up here, and I have a different perspective on my life as a result of that. But, feeling his disappointment was one of the worst feelings ever, and I wish I could say that was the only time I had disappointed him, but I continued to disappoint him over and over and over again until I got sober, and it was really hard for me. It was hard for me to hear that, because all I wanted was his approval, and I spent my life seeking the approval of others because I thought if someone else validates me, then I'm good enough, and my alcoholism, because I knew I identify with alcoholism, and I identified with those feelings and those actions far before I ever took a drink, feeling like I could be in a room like this and be the only person here, just feeling like that disconnect between me and everyone else. I know I've shared this before, but where I felt like everyone else got a handbook on how to live life, and I didn't get it, and I was frustrated, and when I would ask people how they interact with others, they would just look at me like I was weird, and then they wouldn't answer it, and then they'd leave me alone. So it was really hard for me. I was that kid all through elementary school that played by themselves at recess. I just didn't know how to interact with other people, so I got really good at doing activities by myself. I was a bookworm. I read all the time. Because I didn't have to have other people to read, and I'd rather just do something that doesn't require other people than have to go get over that fear and work through that and try and connect with someone else, because that's really scary and that's hard, and I don't know how to do it, so I'm just not going to even try. I'm just going to go over here instead, and that's what I did with my drinking, right? I allowed my drinking to channel every choice and decision I made in my life because it was easier than trying to do something knowing that I couldn't do it. Because I couldn't stop drinking. And for me, I was always just really, really busy. I tried to be busy, I was an avid equestrian. I ran track in high school and in middle school, and it was something that kept me busy, that kept me involved in stuff so that I didn't have to spend time by myself and home alone, and because when I was home alone and by myself, that was the time when some people refer to them as the voices. I call it my alcoholism, right? When my brain is just trying to pick me apart. You're never good enough. You're never going to be good enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not skinny enough. Nobody likes you. You don't have any friends. Just over and over and over again. And the only way that I could hit my pillow at night and sleep was if I was so tired that I could barely keep myself awake, And then when I discovered alcohol, that's when I had to have it in order to go to sleep. Because otherwise, all of that insecurity would just keep me awake, and in my first drink, I was about 17. It was a couple weeks after my birthday. A really serious relationship had ended, and I thought I had been okay with it and that I was good, and whatever, it's not a big deal. And what happened was in that year that I had been with him, all my friends had started drinking, and I was kind of raised where you don't drink. My dad's a very, very normal drinker. To fall asleep, he'll put a shot in a highball glass and put some flat soda or watered down juice in that, and he'll sip on it a little bit until he falls asleep. you know, and my mom she was missing an enzyme to process alcohol, so anytime she drank, it made her violently ill. So I never saw her drink except around the holidays, and then she'd have like one eggnog and she'd go to bed, you know, and so I mean, I wasn't really exposed to a lot of heavy drinking. I knew that my dad's father was a drunk, and the only experience I had with that was that I knew that he used to beat on everyone in his family drunk, and he was really, really angry, and you know, him and my grandma had divorced, and basically I've seen him to this day 4 times in my life, you know, and so they made it very clear to me that if you're an alcoholic, your family doesn't want to be around you and you're a mean person, you know. So my 2 choices were, if I drink, I might get really, really sick because mom can't drink, or I could be an alcoholic. And I was like, I'd rather just leave it alone. Either way seems uncomfortable. And so I did that, and then all of a sudden I was just, you know, restless, irritable, and discontent. I was uncomfortable in my skin. Everyone around me was drinking, you know, and a lot had happened in their life in the last year, and I didn't really know much about it. So instead of me being comfortable around my friends, I was highly uncomfortable. And they were like, just take a drink, Katy, it'll be okay, nothing bad's gonna happen, your dad's not gonna find out, you know, you don't have to worry about anything. And I was like, okay, I'm not really sure I'm gonna like it though. And so what they did was they gave me a Smirnoff Ice, and they're like, try this is pretty mild. And I was like, okay. And I was like, oh, it's bubbly, but I don't really like it, you know. And they're like, well, just drink it fast, and then it won't really matter. And so I was like, okay. And so I did that, and then they gave me 2 more, and I did that. And this was at a bonfire, and it was dark, you know, and I don't know about you, but when it's dark out, for me, it's real hard for me to figure out when enough's enough, because I can't really see much anyways, you know, and I'm sitting down, so it's not like I start to lose my balance. I have no idea. And so I proceeded to have 3 more mimosas after that, and then a couple rum and cokes, and I'm not talking about like little glasses, I'm talking about like the big 7-Eleven cups, and then I had a couple shots at Captain. And so, I mean, the first time I drank, that's how I drank. And I remember I hated the way it tasted, but it was something to do because I was so uncomfortable. And so that's my natural inclination, is when I am uncomfortable, I've got to get some comfort fast, some relief from how I feel. And so I got drunk, and I remember standing up and being like, oh, this is not good. And I promptly sat right back down. And I was one of those kids that could never take a joke. Everything was so serious, you know, like I didn't understand sarcasm at all, because I thought you were serious. You were literally telling me this, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. I don't like how this feels. And I was one of those people that was wound so tight, and I had no idea that I was until I got drunk for the first time. And I can't say it was like magic, like this aha moment, but what I do know is I felt freedom for the first time in my life, and I had never felt like that before. And I loved it, right? And I was not someone who was like gymnastically inclined, and so I was like, well, if I do a cartwheel, then I can't be drunk, right? You know, and I like tried, and I promptly fell on my face, and so I was like, well, let me just try a couple more times just to be sure, right? And because that's what I do. If I fail the first time and I really want the answer to be what I want it to be, I'm going to keep doing it over and over again. Doesn't matter how many times I get hurt, doesn't matter how many times I literally fall on my face, I'm going to keep doing it until I get the answer I want, you know. And my sponsor told me that's called being belligerent. And it's a characteristic that I wish I hadn't brought all the way into recovery. But, you know, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. And for me, that is what my drinking was like. Drink a whole lot because I'm uncomfortable, get really, really, really drunk, try to tell myself I'm not drunk, find some way to meander and make it back to bed, wake up the next morning still drunk from the night before, and either continue or try and dry out a little bit, you know. And I wasn't a daily drinker from the start. I drank that night. I remember having a couple shots at homecoming, and it didn't do anything for me, so I was like, whatever. There's not enough for me to really get drunk, so I'm just not going to worry about it, you know. And then I drank again that Christmas, you know, like it wasn't a big deal, you know. Like I could have like 1 or 2 because there wasn't enough for me to really get drunk, so it was easy for me to abstain, right? And then what happened, fast forward almost a year, is I went to college for the first time. And I all of a sudden didn't have my dad there. So I didn't have anyone telling me you're not allowed out. I used to make this joke where I didn't have a curfew because I wasn't allowed out, and that was the truth, right? I talked to my dad about that a couple weeks ago, and it's because him and his brothers and his sister ran wild because they had a single parent home, and my oma was always working, so they got to do whatever they wanted. And so the benefit of that is he knew exactly what teenagers did. The downside of it is he expected me to do everything that teenagers did, so I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. I had to make plans with my friends up to a week or 2 weeks in advance. He had to talk to their parents, like he would call while we were there to make sure that we were there. And I was a good kid. I did well in school. I got scholarships to college, athletic and academic. And, my dad was really proud of me. And he was like, I'm proud of you, but you could always do better. There was always that contingency, like a compliment. He always followed a compliment up with, but you need to do this better. And I realized that there are a lot of these broken ideals I still carry from my childhood, and that's not his fault. He didn't know that I was going to take it that way and that my alcoholism was going to use that to fuel some of the damaging things I would do to myself later on in life. And it's really no one's fault, right? What happens it's not just what happened, it's like how I use it to justify what I want to do. And so I started drinking every day when I got to college because I was uncomfortable, and here was this opportunity to reinvent myself. Like, I can finally have friends, I can do things with people, I can go out, and so I was a little buck wild because I had freedom and I didn't really know what to do with it because I'd never had much before. And I got drunk, really drunk, the first night I was there, and I don't really remember much except being really, really scared. I had never gotten drunk like that before, and instead of waking up the next day and saying, I'm not going to do that, I was like, I need to do that again. Maybe I'll be able to manage it a little bit better this time. And, long story short, I couldn't. And I got in trouble 3 weeks later by my coach. And ironically, I didn't drink beer because I didn't like the way it tasted at all, and it took a lot more beer to get me where I wanted to be. And then I just got full before I got drunk. So I was like, that's a waste of time and money. I'd just rather get some liquor. And so I was holding someone's beer while they were in the bathroom, and I got caught by security, and they knew I was underage. And so I got in trouble, and my coach suspended me from the team, and she was like, tryouts haven't even been official. What are you doing? And I was like, honestly, that really wasn't my beer. And she was like, I haven't heard that before. She's like, you're on trial, you have to make sure that you don't step a toe out of line again, right? And I'd only been in college a month. This was something I'd been working for my whole life, was to be able to compete and be a pro, and instead I messed it up within a month because of my drinking, and I wish I could say that was the only time I messed that up because of drinking, and it wasn't. I started to willingly hand things off. You don't have to be a daily drinker to be an alcoholic. For me, I was a daily drinker. I did drink by myself. I drank every night. And I couldn't have told you that I didn't have any power of choice. I couldn't have told you that I wanted to stop. I would have said, I really enjoy what I'm doing. I really enjoy drinking like this, and you can't take it away from me. Almost like I dare you to. And all the relationships I had in my life started to crumble, right? I had a blackout for the first time after drinking for about a month. And I was scared, and I called my mom scared. I was like, I don't remember what happened. I was like, there are a lot of pictures that I don't remember being there for. And she told me, well, maybe you should stop drinking. And I said, I'll think about it, right? And then the next day I was drinking again. That is powerlessness. I thought I just changed my mind. I was overreacting. It's really not a big deal. I can do this. I'll just have better control this time. And I didn't, and what happened was I continued to drink like that, and then one of my girlfriends died in a car crash on the way to a party that I was supposed to be in the car with them, and I had another rallying point the day before, and I was like, no, I'm going to do my homework, I'm going to get this right, I'm here to learn stuff, I'm not just going to piss away this opportunity. And, I had told myself that so many times over and over again, and it would have been after I'd been out drinking all night, I'd still be drunk in class. I remember the semester before I had taken all my finals drunk, and I passed everything, but at the same time, I know I could have done a lot better. And so I was just struggling a lot with that, and it was one of many rallying points I had. I'm just going to do better, I'm going to do different, something's going to shift, And I stayed back, and that might have saved my life. You know, like if I had been in that car, I'd have been riding shotgun, and my neck would have been the one that snapped, you know, and that was enough to scare me sober for a couple months. But I had to take a hostage, because being sober by myself sucks, you know, so I had to take a hostage with me, someone that would stay in and would do their homework and was like a good person, you know, so that would rub off on me, because I didn't really want to be sober. I just knew I had to do something different. And what happened was I was dry for about 6 months, then I went home for the summer and promptly ended that relationship because I was no longer served a purpose, right? I didn't need a hostage because I was home. I can't get in trouble at home. And so I started drinking every day again, you know, and I remember when I'm drinking, if I am working full time, I'm a workaholic. And as long as I have something else to distract me, I don't drink. You know, when I'm working 80 hours a week, probably not drinking because I'm only sleeping like 5 or 6 hours a night if I'm lucky, you know, and I can do that, but there is always an end to it, right? I either get fired or something happens, then all of a sudden I'm back to my old ways, drinking all the time, drinking every day, keeping liquor bottles stashed in my car, and I didn't know that that wasn't a thing. I thought other people clearly must do that, and no, they don't. I had a big backpack full of, I think, 6 or 7 different kinds of liquor at any given time, and you know, if I just like felt like drinking, I would pull over and I would take a couple swigs and I'd put the cap back on and then I'd put it back in my back seat, you know. And my sister and I were talking about that yesterday, actually, how one of her cheerleading games, we snuck out at halftime to get our coats from the car, and we took shots at halftime before she went back in, and she just kept cheering like there was nothing wrong with it, you know. And it didn't occur to either one of us that that's not what you do, you know. You don't give, what was it, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, you don't give 15-year-old shots out of the back of your car like at halftime at a game, you know. And we're both really sick, but so it was just something that it just didn't occur to me that that's not what you do. You know, I had no sense of normalcy or really any clear perception when it came to my drinking. And I thought I had gotten it under control because I was only blacking out like twice a week now instead of every day. And, you know, I was like, listen, you know, 4 or 5 blackouts every couple weeks is like great odds when you're drinking every day, you know, and just the delusion and all of the lies I told myself to justify what I was doing so I could keep drinking, so I could keep living that way, because I loved it. You know, I was like, oh, it's just a lifestyle. I'm hooked on it. This is just what I like to do, you know. And really, I had a lot of fun drinking. You know, I've partied with professional athletes, and I got to go a lot of places that people don't usually get to go. And I wish I had been more present for a lot of it, really, but I was just drunk. You know, I don't remember it. I don't remember the athletes' names. I don't remember the companies I worked for. I don't remember any of that. What I remember is going to the bar and getting hammered, you know, and being unable to really walk later, you know. And I remember that, like, happening over and over and over again, you know. And I remember that I had gotten in trouble again, and, you know, I'd been caught by my dean really, really drunk in public, obviously, because that's what I like to do. I like to get drunk and I like to walk around and pretend that I'm fine, you know, and I'm like okay in a blackout for a while, and then all of a sudden the rest of it catches up to me, and then I just like can't stand up anymore, you know. And that happened mid-conversation with the dean. It was like, oh, hey, you know, how you doing? And then just drop, you know. And I got in a lot of trouble for that because I was an RA at my university, and you're not supposed to be doing that, especially if you're underage. And so I probably got fired from that position, and I was kind of okay about it, and I tried to manipulate my way into keeping it. And, you know, I was like, well, you know, if I can't do this, then I shouldn't be here, and I should just go home, you know. And I think that woman that didn't take any of my BS, I've since made amends to her, and I'll get to that later. And she's an Al-Anon, and so she knew exactly what was going on way before I did. And I was mandated to go to AA, and if I got caught drinking, I would get expelled. And So I went to my first AA meeting. They assigned me a sponsor. They were like, she's going to come and pick you up. And I was like, oh, great. You know, and so she came to pick me up, and I sat in the car, and I didn't say a word. I just stared out the window. And then I got there, and I stared out the window at the meeting. And when it was time to leave, I stared out the window on the way back, you know, because I didn't want to be sober. I was doing this because I had to, right, because there was so much on my back. And what happened was I was 19 years old, and I wasn't ready to get sober. And they asked me, well, how long do you see yourself, you know, lasting like this? Can you see yourself being sober for the rest of your life? And I said, no. Are you kidding me? They were like, well, what are you talking about? I was like, I'll be sober until I'm 21, because then I can drink and you guys can't say anything, you know. And then what happened was 3 weeks later, I cut that down to the end of the school year. And then 3 weeks later, I cut that down to the end of the term. You know, I was just ready. I had to have an end in sight in order to deal with everything I was feeling with being sober, right? Because I'm physically dry, right? I'm still participating in dry goods, right? Because that's the only way that I know how to be not drinking, is if I'm substituting other stuff, because I really can't handle how I feel on the inside. I can't. And so I have to have something in me at all times. And what happened after that was I started drinking again, and I was a little nervous, right? Because I was afraid the other shoe was going to drop. I was going to get in trouble. You know, I was going to get expelled, and then everyone would know that I had a drinking problem. And so what happened after that was, you know, like, I did okay. You know, I started blacking out again, but twice a month this time. So I was like, progress. You know, I can do twice a month. But what had happened is my blackouts were predictable. They were predictable. Everyone could tell, you know, this is what you're probably going to do. This is what you're probably going to say. And my friends that knew that I had blacked out, they would come and talk to me, and I'd be like, what was going on? And then they started to walk me through it. And I was like, oh, I bet you I did this. I bet you I said that, you know? And they were like, how? And I was like, because that's probably what I would do. Right? I spent so much time drinking that I didn't know what I did sober anymore. You know, so the only Katy that existed was drunk Katy at that point. And then my mom died. And what happened was it threw me over this deep end. You know, all of a sudden I didn't really care if I lived or died. And so that was really one of those lines in the sands that I had, you know, like, I'm not going to cross this, because what would my mama think? She didn't raise me to be like this. She didn't raise me to treat people like that. And all of a sudden I didn't care anymore. You know, I was something inside really broke. And I know today that that was my relationship with God, who I had always been a little upset with, you know, because of everything that had happened to my mom. I was like, she's such a devout woman. You know, why would God do that to her? Why would he give her terminal cancer? Why would she survive cancer and then die of complications with her drugs after being in remission for 10 years? You know, it's like, I don't understand this. You know, and my mom and I were really close, and she would call me at night, and she would just cry because she was unhappy, you know, and she was miserable, and she didn't know how to handle what was going on in her life, you know, and she would call me to talk to me about my sister, you know, like, how do I handle this, you know, because my mother and my father weren't really speaking, and my sister hated my father, and I was mad at my father, and, you know, so she was really the only kind of contact I had with my family for the most part. And she was my lifeline. You know, she was kind of what still kept me in check. And what happened when she died was all of a sudden that wasn't there anymore, and I didn't really care what happened to me. You know, I didn't care if it affected my sister. I didn't care if it affected my father. I didn't care if it affected anything. And when that started to happen, I didn't really care. Like I said, I didn't care what happened, and I started behaving in ways that reckless abandon. You know, like, drinking didn't work for me anymore. I stopped being able to get drunk. You know, it wasn't unusual for me to drink a handle and a case of beer in the same day and still not be drunk. And I was so angry with God for everything that happened to my mom, for the fact that I couldn't get drunk anymore. Like, I couldn't get any relief, right? And I wish I could say that I got sober shortly thereafter, but I continued to live in that vicious cycle of how I felt and not having a solution and just being miserable and wanting to take my own life. I lived like that for another 1.5 years before I found my way to AA, you know, and what happened was my life got really unmanageable. You know, I came into some money, and I had the experience of having everything I thought I wanted and still being unhappy. You know, I could put a face on, but I just didn't feel it on the inside. I was just disconnected from me and everything else that's outside me, you know, and I didn't let anybody in, and I could make you believe that I was doing okay. You know, my family didn't have any idea, except for my sister. My family didn't have any idea what was going on or how bad it was or what my drinking looked like. And so they were that was easy in some respects, but in other respects it was really hard. I didn't have anyone saying, take a look at what you're doing to yourself. Can't you see that you're killing yourself? Can't you see that this is really terrible? You know, I didn't have anyone to give me any outside perspective. And what happened was I got engaged and I bought a house, and I thought, this is going to fix me. This is going to make me feel better. This is what is going to change my life. And I couldn't keep the bills on all the time. You know, like I was lucky if the electricity and the water was on at the same time, you know. And I grew dreadlocks because it was so much easier when I didn't know when I was going to have water in my house, you know. And I couldn't really make it to the grocery store. I had to be messed up before I got to the grocery store because I couldn't handle being around people anymore. And when you live like that, it shows, you know, it shows. Like, it was so obvious to everyone in my life that there was something really wrong going on. I had gotten down to about 95 pounds. And like I said, I had had dreads. In order to get all those out, I had had to cut a chunk of my hair because the rest of it just wouldn't come out. And I thought I was able to, you know, keep everything under wraps. When you're malnourished, it shows, you know, it shows. And what happened was I came home for my sister's birthday, and I hadn't been able to be present for her first birthday after Mom died. You know, I just couldn't do it. It was uncomfortable for me, so I just couldn't be there, right? How selfish and self-centered. I couldn't be there for my sister because it was uncomfortable for me to be reminded that Mom wasn't here, you know. And what happened was I came home for her birthday, and she had gotten sober in our sister fellowship at the time, and so her birthday party was sober, and I was like, this is whack. You know, it's the first family gathering that I'm 21 and they'll let me drink at, and it's sober because she's not drinking. I was like, great, that's cool. You know, and what happened was I kept my mouth shut and I just rolled my eyes a lot and pretended like I was having fun, you know, but I was miserable and I was unhappy. And she suggested that I go to a meeting, and what happened was I went to a meeting, and it was a speaker meeting, and I identified in. I heard the speaker tell his story, you know, and what he shared was that he remembered drinking and getting really, really drunk and doing terrible things, and his family would ask him, why are you doing this? And the only answer he had was, I don't know. And I would have told you, I would have sworn up and down on my mama's grave, on God, on anything, that I didn't have a drinking problem, that I just didn't know how to deal with life. You know, I was just immature and irresponsible, right? But what I come to find out is I'm an alcoholic. Powerless over alcohol. My life is unmanageable, right? It was so easy for me to accept that my life was just terrible and it was my doing, right? But it was hard for me to accept that the drinking was the problem, you know, because at this point, I wasn't getting drunk anymore. I couldn't, you know, it didn't matter how much I put into my body, I couldn't get drunk anymore. And so I struggled with that, and I said, I don't really understand if this is what my problem is, but I do know that I relate to what that man was saying. I was like, he is talking to me in a way that no one else has ever spoken to me. What he is saying is everything that I couldn't put into words. And I was like, this guy gets it. You know, like I had searched my whole life for a place where I felt like I belonged, and I had just struck out over and over and over again. And the first time I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, it was here. What I've been searching for my whole life was here. And I picked up a white chip that night, and that's the only white chip I've picked up. I mean, that's not everybody's story, but for me, that's what happened. And I was terrified to go back to drinking. And early recovery for me was just really, really busy. It was full of going to a lot of meetings. My sponsor had a lot of women that she sponsored, and she would have them either pick me up for a meeting or come and have me pick them up, because I had a car and a driver's license and insurance when I got sober, and so she had me do that, so I was always with someone who was sober. You know, I didn't have a cell phone my first couple weeks of sobriety. I also didn't have any money, so I was like, ugh, I could go to the bar, but I don't have any money, and I really don't want to have to talk to someone in order to get a drink, so I was like, that's just not going to work for me. I was like, we'll just see what happens here, you know, and I told myself, if this doesn't work, I can always go back to drinking, right? I left myself a loophole. And I remember the first weekend I was sober, I got guilt-tripped into going to a sobriety conference, and I was pissed. I was like, you want me to spend my whole weekend with a bunch of sober people doing what? Sitting around and listening to other drunks? Like, really? You want me to do this? Oh, and there's a barbecue. Ooh, aren't we special? You know, and I was pissed. I was pissed to be sober. I was 21, and I was pissed. And I was like, this isn't the way that my life is supposed to look. You know, like maybe I'll just get it. I just need help getting my life together. That's the problem. I just got to get it together, and then, you know, I can go and be a normal person again. And my sponsor saw that I just desperately needed relief, and it was either going to come in the form of another drink or it was going to come in the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So she had me, I remember we were doing family therapy once a week, so that we had a mediator for the fact that we all were like sniping at each other. And I remember telling my father, and I meant it, I told him that I hated him and I wish he had died, and that he was dead to me. And I believed that with every fiber of my being. And I remember telling my sponsor that, and she was just like, you need to do a 4th step, like right now, or you're going to drink. And I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to drink over it, you know? And what she told me, right, I was, like I said, very belligerent. And what she told me was, we're going to get started on this so you can have some relief. My first step, like I said, I didn't really think I was powerless, but I knew that my life was really terrible and I needed to do something different. And I had, like I said before, I had tried. I had rallied before. I had said, this time it's going to be different. I'm going to do something different. And I never could. I could keep it for like 2 or 3 days, and then I'd be like, ugh, whatever, it's not working. I'm just going to give up because it's a lot of effort and I'm not getting any results immediately. Because I seek that instant gratification, right? That's why I drank liquor. That's why I drank every day. It's because I felt something, I had to drink. I got something from it immediately, you know, until the last year. And the last year it wasn't working anymore, you know, and that's my experience. As I know today, if I were to go back to drinking, it wouldn't fix me because it wouldn't work anymore. You know, if it stopped working before I got here, I'm highly doubtful it would still work for me. And so my second step was more like, I don't really believe I'm crazy, and this word insane is a little uncomfortable to me. I don't know about that. And what she told me was that, and my sponsor told me, insanity is like trying the same thing over and over again, expecting something different. And like I talked about earlier with cartwheels, right? I've done that, doing something over and over again, expecting something different to happen. And I could identify with that. I was like, okay, maybe I can get down with that. That makes a little bit of sense. And the third step was realizing that, like, if I could have done it myself, I would have. And obviously I can't do it by myself because I'm here. So maybe I should try and let somebody else do it for me. And I had a lot of fear in that. I was like, I'm supposed to give my will and my life over to this God, right? This God that hurt my mother, this God that took her away from me, this God that I was so angry and so resentful at. I was like, you want me to trust something that I hate? And she was like, well, I wouldn't, we'll just see what happens. Just see that it has to be something other than you, you know? And she had me read We Agnostics repeatedly, and it wasn't sinking in. And she said, obviously, you're too thick-headed right now. We'll go back to that. Because what I needed to see was that lack of power is my dilemma, right? I don't have the power to change anything in my life. And the only one that does is God, and God, higher power, spirit of the universe, whatever you want to call him, right? And for me, she told me to take a look at, you know, things that I can't argue with, right? Big things that happen that I can't argue with. And for me, that was like the sun rises and the sun sets, regardless of what I do or say, right? The seasons will change, regardless of what I do or say. So for me, the first couple years of my recovery, that was the God I prayed to, the God that made things happen that I couldn't argue with. And I wish my relationship with God would have come easy, and it would have come faster, and it would have been like, yeah, God definitely is. And aside from that, you know, God is or he isn't. He's either everything or he's nothing. And it was easy for me to see that he is and that he's everything, but it was really hard for me to let him have anything in my life because I didn't trust him. You know, I believed in him, but I didn't trust him, right? I didn't have faith in his plan for me. And so then I had to do the 4th step, and I started my 4th step, like I said, at 2 weeks sober. I did my 5th step at a month sober, and my sponsor and I sat down, and I was terrified, right? I tried to just hand her the book and then leave, and she said, that's not how this works. She said, you have to read it out loud, and you have to read it to me, right? In the book, it talks about reading it out loud, like to God and to another human being, you know, admitting all of this stuff, right, this baggage. And the 4th step is this garbage bag that I've been carrying around with all of this stuff in it that I have done that I couldn't let go of. So I just stuffed it in the garbage bag, right? So you have all this garbage and you take it out and you take a look at what's actually in the bag. This is what I've been carrying around for all of these years. This is what's been making me miserable, right? And the 5th step is like, yeah, do you see it? This is what all this is, right? And for me, that was like a monumental step in me trusting another human being, you know, because I didn't trust anybody. I couldn't tell one person everything that was going on, because then you would know all of me, and then if you rejected me, it would really hurt. right? I'd rather you reject me on stuff that I choose to show you, because then it won't hurt as much, right? Because then you're only seeing the part of me I'm allowing you to see. You're not seeing everything, right? I'm not stripped bare. You're not seeing everything. And what happened was when I read her my fifth step, she gave me some of hers, you know, and I was like, okay, cool. If you run to the cops, I got some collateral. All right. And when she did that, I felt okay. I didn't feel like I was being taken advantage of. I didn't feel like I was being manipulated. I didn't feel like, you know, this was going to be used against me. And then what she said, and I'll never forget it, she said, "Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous." You know, and I was so afraid that she was going to kick me out. Like, you can't be here. These things are bad. You shouldn't have done them. You can't be here, right? I thought Alcoholics Anonymous was going to kick me out, right? And like I said, it's the only place I ever felt like I truly belonged in my whole life. And I was terrified to be kicked out. And what she told me afterwards was to go home and to sit quietly for an hour, and 6 and 7, you know, she actually wrote down a list, like, these are your character defects. And she wrote them down for me, and I stuck them on my wall and was like, I don't want to do these things. I don't want to be this person. But she told me I had to sit still. I couldn't talk on the phone. I had to just sit there. And I looked at her, and she was like, for an hour. I was like, are you sure an hour? Like, that's a long time. And just a little background, I couldn't sit still for about 30 seconds when I was newly sober, and that's not an exaggeration. She used to make me sit on my hands so that I wouldn't twitch or fidget, and she made me spit out my gum a couple times because I just snap it, because I couldn't handle just like sitting still, right? And it's kind of funny sometimes, but that's why I turn and I look at whoever's speaking when they share in a meeting, because that is the only way to have 100% of my attention focused on that, right? Then I don't take a look at other people and start judging them. I don't turn around and get distracted by every little thing. And what she explained to me was, if you're turning and you're shifting and you're not paying attention to the meeting, you may distract someone, and they might miss the only thing that they're going to hear tonight that could keep them sober. She's like, so you need to stop being selfish, and you need to sit still so you don't distract somebody else. And I was like, oh, okay, you know, and because I needed someone to break it down for me like that, because otherwise I am selfish and self-centered in my very core. I am struck with that terrible character defect, right? I can't see how my actions affect anybody else as long as I'm stuck in the bondage of self. And so I sat in 6 and 7 for a very painful hour, and then I got to work doing my ACE step. And my sponsor's a big proponent of the 12 and 12 too, so I would read the corresponding step with what we were doing in the big book with that step. And my ACE step list was really easy for me to do, right? Because I knew what I had done to other people. I knew what I had done, and so it was easy for me to write that down, and I didn't know what we were going to do with it except make amends, whatever that looked like. And I was like, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to write it down. And she put my amends in 3 different types, right? There was the face-to-face amends, you know, where I needed to own up to what I had done to that person. There was the leave it alone. You're never going to speak to them again because you've already done enough damage, so we're just going to live differently. And then there were amends that I had to try and, well, there were financial amends too. I didn't have a ton of those, mostly because I had racked up a whole lot of credit card debt, and I had to pay that off sober, and that's never fun. So, I mean, like, my financial amends were to my dad, and he didn't want me to make the financial amends to him until I had graduated and gotten a good job and was able to pay him back, you know, without giving him all my money and then having to ask to borrow more money because I didn't have any money because I had just given him all the money, you know, and so he wanted me to wait on that, you know, and I give him some whenever I can, and so I've made all my amends, and I sat on the last 3 for about 2 years because I was afraid of the reaction I was going to get, you know, and those amends were some of the most powerful ones, and they were really hard because I don't know what happened in those relationships for them to break off the way that they did. You know, I was blackout drunk, and I must have said or did something, and I don't remember what it was, and when I made the amends to these women, they didn't remember what it was either, you know, and I have an open invitation to one of my friends' weddings, you know, and it's a lot. We hadn't spoken in 5 years, and she just told me she was proud of me and she wanted me to keep doing what I was doing, and that she really respected the fact that I owned up to it. She's like, I don't remember what it was. She's like, but if it's been eating your lunch like that, I'm glad that you said something, you know, and she's like, next time you're in town, we're going to get lunch. You know, I want to hear all about your life. And then the 10th step is something that I don't do daily because I use it like a hammer to destroy myself instead of to build with. I do one about every week, sometimes every couple weeks, depending on what's going on in my life. Where have I been selfish, dishonest, resentful, and afraid? And for me, when stuff starts really piling up there, it's an indicator of some causes and conditions of my alcoholism that are starting to manifest, right? And then it's only a short matter of time before I start being restless, irritable, and discontent, and I start to literally drive the train of my life into the ground again. You know, I've done that repeatedly sober, and I wish I could say I hadn't, and that my life has just been peaches and cream, but it's not. And life on life's terms happens, and it's not so much what I do that leads up to that, it's what I do after that. You know, am I going to continue to walk through it like a woman with dignity and grace, like a sober woman of Alcoholics Anonymous, or am I going to walk through it acting like a brat, you know, that didn't get their way, throwing temper tantrums? And 11th step is about prayer and meditation, right? My sponsor talked to me and she told me that prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening, and if I want to build a relationship, I have to do both. If all I'm doing is talking, that's not a relationship. That's like a sounding board. That's an outlet. That's not really listening for anything else. That's just being present, running my mouth, and then saying, see you later, right? That's using God instead of allowing him to flow through me and to have that relationship. My form of meditation has changed over the years. There used to be an active meditation where I'd have to go walking. I'd go to the gym. I'd go for a run with my dogs. I'd try and go be out in nature and just recenter, you know, and I try and do a guided meditation once or twice a week now in addition to that. And I find that when I can sit still, one, it's a miracle, and two, I used to have all these preconceived notions of what meditation was like, and it's different for different people, but I thought it was just this you know, you sit and you do the lotus position and you just are calm and zen and no thoughts flow through your head, and really for me, I'm not capable of that. Some people, it may be your meditation, but for me, what has developed has been the ability to let it flow through me, you know, to let these thoughts go through without grabbing onto them and obsessing over them. And if I start to obsess, I know it's time to end the meditation, and then that's what I write in my prayer journal that night. Hey, God, this is what stuck with me. I don't really know what it means, but I do know that I need your help with it. And the 12th step is carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's doing this, it's doing service work, it's sponsoring other people, you know, and for me, I haven't always had sponsees in my life, but I have always been active in my home group, and I have always been active at different levels of service. You know, the more time I spend doing stuff for Alcoholics Anonymous is the less time I spend obsessing about myself and trying to manipulate things to get what I want out of life. If I am busy doing God's work, then he is my employer very truly, like it talks about in the big book, right? That's 60 to 63. If I really stick close to him and try and do his work well, then everything will be okay. It may not turn out the way I want, but everything will turn out the way exactly it's supposed to. And the more that I do that, I have found that it's easier for me, much easier for me to start accepting that God's plan is the only one that really matters, not mine. I think I've run out of time, but I'm grateful to be sober. I'm grateful to be here, and thanks for letting me share.